Matt Mercer is one of the best dungeon masters in the world, and if I asked you why he is so good, you would probably already have an answer, like he's a professional voice actor and a world-class performer. And no. I mean, that's not wrong. Mercer is talented, sure, but I don't think that's what makes him so good. In this video, we'll explore what actually does, and by the end, I think you will not only agree with me, but maybe you will even start seeing this game we're playing in a different way. Because when I started digging, I realized this went way deeper than just DMing techniques. So let's get into it, and to start, we need to take a closer look at those usual answers first. The usual story people tell about Matt Mercer goes something like this. He is a professional voice actor with years of experience. So yeah, obviously, when he plays an NPC, they have this great voice which makes them shine straight away. And because he's an actor, he understands pacing and drama and how to hold attention. And the conclusion becomes Critical Role became this big thing because it's basically Hollywood meets D&D. And I get why people say this. I think it misses something important, like we'll see in a second. But I do get it, because watching Critical Role for 5 minutes is enough to notice how good the performances are. Not just from Matt, by the way, but from everyone there, really. And I think for a lot of people, for dungeon masters especially, it's easy to reach that conclusion. But I would like you to try something. Please take a moment and think about the moments from any of the Critical Role campaigns where Matt was the DM that really stood out. Oh yeah, by the way, if you hate spoilers and have some catching up to do on Mercer as a DM era Critical Role, there are a few of those ahead. I think a lot of people would probably mention, for example, Scanlan's departure after being resurrected, or Vax's sacrifice to the Raven Queen. And I think those moments all have something in common. In most of them, Mercer is barely doing stuff. He might be a great actor, but those moments are not where the voices shine. He is sitting behind a screen. Sometimes he doesn't even say anything, and he lets the players create those great, memorable moments. And I feel like this is kind of a problem for the "he's just a great performer" explanation. Because if the Mercer magic was really mostly coming from his acting ability, shouldn't the most powerful moments of the campaigns where he is the DM be the ones where he is acting the hardest? Like the big villain speeches, for example. Because yeah, those are cool, but they tend to not be the moments people remember most. I think the moments that end up in all these compilation videos are the ones where Mercer did something that's actually invisible. He did it before the session, and it created the conditions for one or several players to have a breakthrough. Something was at the origin of these moments, but it's not performance. In 2019, Mercer shared his actual session notes on Twitter, or X, or whatever you want to call it. He did it for Campaign 2, episodes 17 and 50. And this collective moment of, wait, that's it? Happened. Because they're kind of minimal, but the one thing I want to focus on here is not on how little is in there, but on what's there versus what isn't. What you can find in there is stuff like where the world is at, what the factions are doing, what NPCs want. If the party goes here, this is available. If they do X, then Y does something. Also, environmental details. And what you can't find is dramatic moments, emotional arc planning, or precise scene-by-scene explanations. My point is, I don't think these are really the notes of a performer preparing a performance. Mercer's prep notes are those of someone tracking the state of a living world. And I know saying this and making this video will trigger comments from some people who think, okay, but this whole thing is just scripted, right? The players know what's going to happen and they just act it out. I hear these takes quite often, but I think it's wrong, and we're actually going to try and prove it later in this video. And now that we've talked about how the voices, as cool as they are not actually doing most of the heavy lifting, the question we need to focus on is, if it's only great surface stuff, what exactly is Matt Mercer doing behind that screen? It's kind of a long answer, but it starts with, he's not telling a story, but running a world. And maybe you think it sounds like the same thing, but it really isn't. Let me explain. A regular storyteller, or just storyteller, controls things like pacing, for example. They control what gets revealed and when, as well as emotional arcs and where things go. A storyteller has the idea of how the story should feel, and they guide everything toward that feeling. There's nothing wrong with that, if that's what you and your players are into, by the way. I know some people think a DM should never even try to be a storyteller. I personally think there are actually ways to make it work, but that's beyond this video. But the point is, I don't think that's what Mercer does. Instead, Mercer builds situations, environments, and systems. His NPCs and factions have motivations and goals that exist and do things no matter what the party is doing. And then he puts the players in the middle of all of that, and he grabs popcorn. It's the difference between being an author and some kind of fantasy engineer, designer. You get the point. In 2022, during the Game Masters of Edariad roundtable, Mercer said, "Part of the preparation is getting to know enough about the world so that when you start, you can kind of let all that preparation go and just ride with the player's actions." I like this sentence a lot because to me it shows Mercer kind of looks at prep like soil. You plant seeds and then you let things grow. Mercer and many other great DMs preps in a modular way and builds a toolkit of things that can be deployed in any order depending on what the players do. Justin Alexander, aka the Alexandrian, who is a highly respected RPG theory writer, analyzed this approach and found what I think is a really elegant way of explaining it. He uses the word Greek chorus to talk about Mercer's approach. The chorus is composed of those modular elements, and it doesn't drive the plot forward, but establishes the scene, takes the character's actions in consideration, and provokes or inspires what comes next. And when doing this, as he puts it, the DM really becomes an opportunity and context creator, and the players drive the actual campaign and story. Which, okay, if you're with me so far, we need to take a moment here. Because as cool as it sounds, many DMs try to do that. And not all games are created equal, so it should also raise a pretty big question. If Mercer is not really plotting anything, but focusing on building reactive worlds, and then letting the players steer the story, then why does Critical Role feel so incredibly well plotted? People think it's actually not just plotted, but scripted. How do narrative seeds that first appeared in episode 12 pay off in episode 95 or something? How does it all connect? The answer to that question is the most counterintuitive thing about Mercer's approach, and I think it can teach us very valuable lessons about creativity in general. But before we get into it, just one quick thing. I see a lot of you watching these videos without being subscribed, and I get it. Subscribing can feel like a big commitment, but the thing is, these videos take me a lot of work to make, and when you subscribe, it sends a small signal to the algorithm that it was good and it should be shown to more people. And more people means more resources for me to keep making them better and better. So if you're getting any value from this, please hit subscribe and I'll keep going deeper. Alright? Okay, so back to it now. And let's start with the "it feels so tight it might as well be scripted" thing. Critical Role does feel. Emphasis on feel. Meticulously plotted. Like if you watch campaigns 1 and 2, for example, there are moments where a detail introduced quite early on suddenly becomes key to the entire story. And character arcs that interact with world events in ways that feel like it was just meant to be. But we just established that given how it preps with this modular reactive world approach, that's not really what's happening. So how? I think the answer is something we can call retroactive coherence. And I think it might be the single most important skill Matt Mercer has developed. Even more important than the voices and the improv. Here's what I mean. When Mercer plants the seeds we discussed, he does not actually know what fruit he is planting. Maybe an NPC seed will start interacting with a location seed or a faction seed. He won't know until later, sometimes much later. And then he goes to this little metaphorical garden of his, looks back at everything that's happened, like the accidents, the player choices, and the weird outcomes, and he puts a Sherlock Holmes hat on and finds connections. He says, huh, interesting, this is a beautiful flower. Maybe it could climb on that tree and it would be even more beautiful. And he creates coherence from what already exists. You could say he builds meaning backward. Alright, enough gardening metaphors. Let's look at actual examples to make it easier to understand. In Campaign 2, Episode 26, Molly, Taliesin's character, dies. You know, it's always an option when combat happens. It wasn't planned, and the table was really devastated. But here is the cool part. Taliesin and Matt had agreed before the start of the campaign on Molly being a character suffering from amnesia with a whole past life. And although Matt had the idea for Lucien, who turned out to be the big bad of the campaign quite early on as well. At first, Lucien was supposed to be kind of an evil spirit, jumping from body to body and hoping to kill Molly at some point to reclaim his original body. And so, when Molly died, it kind of messed with Matt's original plans, as he mentioned in the Season 2 wrap-up. But close to 100 episodes later, it was revealed that Molly's body was missing from his grave, and it eventually turned out that Lucien, the big bad, had reclaimed it. I think the one thing to take away from this is we've all read stories or watched movies where the author tries to force down our throats a clever connection. You know, oh wow, the hero's lost brother is also the villain's right-hand man. Like, yeah, sure. But when the same kind of connection emerges naturally as a consequence of playing, it feels way more natural and satisfying. Even if it's the exact same plot point, it feels more like you're discovering something and less like you're just being told. I think Mercer captured his whole philosophy on the matter in one sentence during a Sly Flourish interview. He said DMs should find ways to make their inconsistencies true. And I really like that line. Trying to prevent inconsistencies by tightening the plot would probably not work that well, because that would either be very frustrating for him as a DM when the players just start doing things he didn't plan for, or lead to him railroading hard and piss the players off. So instead, he allows those weird bits to happen, because they will happen, because the world is quite complex and very responsive, so it just won't be perfectly consistent. And then he transforms them and integrates them into what's canon. And by doing so, he makes those accidents feel intentional and genius. Now, I want to zoom out for a second, because I think this actually goes beyond D&D. This retroactive coherence technique is not unique to tabletop games. You'll find it in TV writing, novel writing, even in music. Improvisers will sometimes hit a wrong note and choose to use it as a pivot to modulate and take the melody in an entirely new, surprising, and beautiful direction. The implication I think is really cool is that sometimes the most powerful stories aren't really designed forward, but revealed backward. Someone takes the raw materials created by accidents and coincidence and emergence and thinks, wait a minute, this shape, if I refine it a bit, it will look like it was always there. Mercer does this really well, and it might feel intimidating to try, but I really think the principle is something any DM should take a close look at. You don't need to plan your whole campaign, but you do need to listen, to pay attention to what your campaign is producing organically, and then to build a meaning from there. Okay, so Mercer builds reactive worlds instead of plots. Then he creates coherence backward from whatever emerges. But there's still something missing from the picture. There are three things he does or say very often that people talk about all the time and that are easily understood as signature catchphrases. And now that we've talked about all this stuff, I want to show you that they take another meaning when you look at them through the lens we've been building so far. We can start seeing them as proof. The first one is maybe the most famous Mercerism out there. You can certainly try. It's just everyone knows he says that all the time, And sure, you can think it just means, oh, well, Mercer is generous. He lets players attempt crazy things. But I think it also makes sense to think about it as something more than that. you can certainly try is the response of someone who designs systems and believes they should then be responsible for the outcomes. For example, there's this moment in episode 18 of the Force Grey campaign where Joe Manganiello, playing a paladin, tries to reattach a severed hand using his Lay on Hands ability, which is not really 5e rules as written. Joe described how he used his holy symbol and a whispered prayer, etc. So Mercer, as a world simulator, asked himself, okay, what would the world do with this? And he decided to ask for a religion check. He improvised divine intervention from Tiamat, the paladin's deity, and allowed the hand to reattach. But the flash of divine energy actually caused 10 additional points of damage to the barbarian who had just lost their hand. It's a really great example of how you can extend the simulation to welcome new input while still making sure there are consequences and internal consistency. The second Mercerism I want to look at is another very famous line. How do you want to do this? Yeah, very famous catchphrase too. And it does produce cool, fun moments. But is it just that? Think about what this, the death of the enemy, aka the climax of a fight, is in most stories. In movies, books, and even in a lot of D&D tables. If you're a director, it gives you the opportunity to land this very cool shot. If you're an author, it's the perfect occasion to pull off some really flowery sentence. And if you're a DM and you want to express yourself and leave a lasting impression on your players, it's the perfect moment for your most dramatic description. So yeah, if you're first and foremost a performer, the climax is where you go all in. And Mercer, even though he does end up describing the scenes in epic ways, he only does it after the players take creative control and tell him what they have in mind. The most famous DM catchphrase in the history of this game. Is it? I think it might be at this point, Well, it was turned into a rallying cry by a professional actor DM, putting his abilities at the service of his players. And I think that says a lot about his instincts. If what made Mercer so good was just being a great actor, he would probably want to take that opportunity and put his own creativity front and center. But because he cares about the world and the players, in addition with being a great performer, he says, the world created the conditions for this, and the dice confirmed the outcome, so I'll let this moment belong to the person who rolled them and their character. He keeps giving away the climax over and over again, and I think it's the reflex of someone whose job is to build worlds for other people to have moments in, and not to deliver those moments themselves with great performances. And this is great, but we still have one more element to look at, one more proof before we move on to the next bit. The third Mercerism is Mercer's resurrection system. I think this one might be the most important of the three. Death is supposed to be the ultimate consequence, but at higher levels, standard D&D resurrection makes it kinda trivial. You die, someone casts a spell, you come back. It's really more of an inconvenience than anything else. So Mercer looked at this and basically said, yep, we need more drama. But instead of just banning resurrection from the game, which would not really be fair, he created a new system for it. A homebrew rule. His Fading Spirit system requires party member to make skill checks during a resurrection ritual based on their form of contribution, which encourages roleplay. Each success or failure adjusts a final DC, and each resurrection attempt makes that DC harder. So, as the campaign progresses, a permanent, real death remains a true possibility, even at high level. Again, system design. He identified what he thought was a mechanical flaw. Death doesn't have enough stakes at high levels, and he built a system aiming to naturally produce dramatic tension. We briefly talked about Scanlan's death and resurrection a bit earlier. Well, this system helped produce that moment, which is one of the greatest scenes in the entire show. It created conditions the players responded to, and it became a way cooler story beat than if it had just been pre-written by a single author. The pattern across all these examples is the same. Systems produce moments, which produce emotions. And if you want to start doing this in your own games but don't know where to start, I built something that might interest you. It's called The Living Town, and it's a compilation of 15 interconnected NPCs with relationships, secrets, and problems already in motion. It's more than just a character collection, though. You pull one thread and the whole town responds. Kind of like a small world engine in a box. And you can check it out by simply clicking the link in the description. Alright, cool. So far so good, but I think there's one more layer we need to explore, because we looked at world simulation and how, intense moments and climaxes work in Critical Role. But this does not explain something I always found really surprising about this show. How even the quiet moments can be filled with meaning. Because Mercer can do that. And to learn how to, I think he borrowed something from a filmmaker who died almost 30 years ago. Earlier this year, in a joint interview for Variety with Brendan Lee Mulligan, Mercer talked about Akira Kurosawa, specifically a concept Kurosawa mentioned often, ma, which roughly translates to negative space. This concept is all about purposeful emptiness. Mercer said he fought for it, even in the making of their animated series. He said, "We've had these conversations with our animated series, and it's been a fight and many hard-won moments to allow those moments of ma to take a quiet beat and live in the world and feel it breathe and remind yourself that the stakes don't matter unless you're reminded what you're fighting for." And Brennan then mentioned Seven Samurai, Kurosawa's famous masterpiece, and a specific slow rain scene before the final battle, which to him explained really well what ma was all about. He said, "If I don't let you watch the rain fall on this peaceful village, how will you know what violence is?" When you take that rain scene, I don't think Kurosawa cuts to a peaceful village because the screenplay demands this is where you bore the audience, He shows you scared people waiting in the rain because that's how people feel before battle. The environment feels real and textured, and therefore quiet lives inside it naturally. You can do this poorly, and then it just becomes, a pacing technique like any other, or correctly, like in that movie, or like Matt and Brennan try to do, in which case it really enriches the world and the emotional experience of the person watching the movie, or playing the game. Even though Kurosawa is a filmmaker, and as such has total control over what he chooses to show, his instinct is kind of the instinct of a world builder. And I think this is why these guys feel a connection to him. You make the world feel inhabited first, and then let the drama emerge from that reality. You put energy and time in building the quiet parts, just so that when the systems you put in place collide with them, the resulting events become strong emotional moments. It's exactly what Mercer does at the table. Like, maybe you like the tavern conversations and shopping episodes less than the rest, but these are important. They exist because the world of Edariad contains people going to taverns and buying stuff, and because actual play is just slower than movies as a medium. And because those moments feel real, even if they're not the most exciting when they happen, when something bad comes up, you feel it in a completely different way than if the campaign had been all action-packed all the time. Last year, Mercer spoke at Auburn University, and he described D&D as half math, half jazz. And I love this, because it really makes sense considering everything we've been talking about. In this metaphor, the math is the systems, the rules, and the world engine we discussed. And jazz is the improvisational response to what those systems produce. And you need both for the magic to happen. But the math is the foundation, because if you don't have the systems, there's nothing to improvise with. The jazz musician needs the chord structure to do their thing. Alright, so if you've been following me this far, we now have this picture of Mercer as this world simulator guy who builds reactive systems, creates meaning backward, and designs his world to include silence so the loud moments hit harder. And this brings me to the thing I've been building toward this entire video that I feel most people miss when discussing what makes Mercer so good. If we go back to that Auburn University appearance, in it, Mercer was asked by the professor interviewing him whether he thought DMing could be seen as care work. And he answered yes. And I found this surprising at first. Because I think if you had to explain what DMing is to someone who had never heard about it before, most people would go for words like performance or storytelling, or even world building. But care work? It would have been way down my list. So I've been thinking about that since I found it, and I think it helps kind of reframe everything. We've spent quite some time in this video talking about systems design and everything around that, like modular prep and reactive worlds, etc. And these are structural descriptions, focusing on the how. But they don't really explain the why. Like, why would you build worlds this way? And I think the answer is that a world simulation for Mercer might be more than just a design philosophy, and closer to some sort of almost ethical posture. Think about what building a world that really responds to player choices really means. Railroads probably tend to be absent from that world, which is full of consequences and real failure. The players in this world, through their characters, are its inhabitants, and they're taken seriously. I think that's respectful. When you do this, you tell your players, I didn't build this world for me to perform at you, but for you to live in. The systems you spend time building are in service of the people at your table. They let the stories appear, and the DM's job is to be the caretaker of the world in which those stories grow. So the best metaphor I could find for this is, I think Mercer might be an ecologist. Someone who'd go about caring for their garden by focusing on getting the conditions right, like, the soil quality, making sure the sunlight can find its way in, etc. And then they would just step back and let things grow and life happen. To do this, you need one skill: be good at attention. You need to be able to start by just watching. Notice when something wants to develop on its own. Nurture it. Sometimes you have to spend some time pulling weeds so it does not ruin everything. But you need to trust the system to produce things you couldn't have planned on your own. And so, that's why Matt Mercer and many other great DMs do care work. And his world of Exandria is proof. It started small, and then it expanded organically year after year based on where the players went and on the consequences of their actions. The beautiful setting books we have now is just the result of a lot of retroactive coherence magic happening over quite some time. Exandria grew from play, accident after accident, and Mercer made sure it felt intentional after the fact. I think Matt Mercer's secret is not that he is this pro-actor guy who tells great stories. He is that, he is good. But if he was just that, he wouldn't be where he is today, and people wouldn't care as much. He builds worlds that tell themselves, and he is also a great listener, which allows him to find the meaning in what the world and the players produce together, and then he makes it a canon part of his creation. You might notice the voices first, because they're hard to miss and really great. But without all this other stuff, you probably would have never heard them, because people wouldn't have gotten attached to the stories. You don't have to be a great storyteller to run an incredible game. Build a world, start small, pay attention, and trust the process. D&D and TTRPGs in general are amazing because the best stories that come out of them are grown more than authored. And I think that's kind of beautiful. And beautiful is good, but what if I told you that everything we discussed about how world building makes you a better DM works even if you never show your world to anyone? So click on this video next to find out why.